All right, welcome everybody to the Riptide workshop on Solana Pay. So excited to be here with you today. I'm Josh Freed. I am on the payments team at Solana, and I've got a great group, a core group of Solana contributors here today to talk to you about what is going on with Solana Pay. I'm going to start with Shiraz, head of payments.
Hey everyone, great to be here. I'm Shiraz and I lead the payments vertical at Solana Labs and excited to talk to you about rebuilding or building from the ground up the future of payments and commerce on the blockchain and Web3.
Next up, we have Ben, who's PM for payments.
Hey, my name is Ben Mills. Recently joined Labs to work on payments. I'm excited to talk with you all today.
We've got Jordan, our head dev for payments.
Hey, I'm Jordan. I work at Solana Labs on the engineering team on wallet adapter and Solana Pay and a lot of the dApp integrations.
And Spencer, also on the core payments BD team.
Hey everyone.
We also recently joined, similar to Ben, after spending 18 years at Google. Happy to be here.
You had some red pills.
All right, we're going to kick it off with Shiraz, who's going to give us a high-level description of Solana Pay, what it is, and why it matters.
Well, that's an easy one because Solana Pay is dead simple. And it's basically premised on the whole reason blockchains exist, right? Which is to make the movement of a digital asset from one account to another account easy and instant and frictionless. And even though blockchains have been around for a while, we haven't really seen that in consumer to merchant payments because the Solana blockchain is performant and it has scalability and very fast settlement and low costs. What drew me to Solana in general was those attributes could enable a new consumer to merchant payment system. So Solana Pay is just a very basic, simple protocol that governs a handshake between a merchant wallet and a consumer wallet. I'll have Jordan talk a little bit more about the architecture of Solana Pay, but that's kind of the foundational piece of it, and that's what we released. I think what's interesting is not so much about just the payments aspect of it, but what is possible to build on top of this protocol. And if you think about commerce, offers, loyalty, the ability for a merchant to engage with the consumer directly in their wallet. You'll hear the term no intermediaries many times because I think one of the great things about the Solana Pay protocol and framework is that it really is about removing an intermediary. So traditional intermediaries, whether it's a payment network or a bank or a company like Google or Apple, they want to be in between the merchant and the customer because they need to, because there's friction in payments. And then they're also like, hey, we'll build this cool stuff. And by the way, we'll collect the data. You don't really need the data. We'll figure out what to do with the data. All of that stuff, I think, can change now that we have blockchains that can enable this. So that's at a high level what it's about. Jordan, if you want to talk a little bit about at the protocol layer, like what we've released and just kind of or Ben, whoever. I'll let both of you kind of jump in on the protocol side.
Ben, why don't you handle this?
So, I mean, the reality is Solana Pay at the protocol level is very simple. Like, we wanted to make something really easy to use and that mostly solve the problem of how will merchants or really dApps in general communicate with a consumer's wallet. Like, the more consistent we make that, the easier it is for the wallet ecosystem to grow, different wallets to come out, and the app or the merchant doesn't have to know which wallet to support and which not. They just support our interface, and that enables easy communication between the merchant and the wallet, which is the consumer. Jordan's probably going to walk through kind of like some basics of how the code works, like what the spec actually is. You can find all this on GitHub, or just go to solanapay.com to see all that. But yeah, I mean, at the core, that is what we've built. I think what we're looking to do next is how do we want to expand the standard? Like, what different features do we need to add in terms of like letting people do more complex payment flows? Like, we might tease some interesting alpha around that later on. But with that, Jordan, are you ready to kind of walk through some code examples?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I want to lay out like the case for Solana Pay that I see. that I think is really interesting. So in the flows that we have with dApps today, you have browser extensions for crypto native users that connect to decentralized apps, and you run transactions over them. And this is pretty separate from e-commerce. And it's also separate from a lot of what people think of as like real world utility for crypto. And that's, I think, what we hope we can start to solve with Solana Pay. So at a basic level, Solana Pay is a variation of a Bitcoin protocol, BIP21 is what it's called. And this is just like a payment link specification. And I'll jump through a little bit of sort of like what's in the spec, I guess, because I know that developers don't read specs, and I usually don't read specs. So we tried to write a spec that was not much like a spec that developers would like to read. So I hope after this, you guys go ahead and read it because it's pretty short and sweet.
You have some Easter eggs in there, or what?
We have Easter eggs in there? Maybe. Yeah. Yeah, so I guess I'll jump into, oh, let's see. Hold on. Got to grant this some kind of system.
Do we lose him?
Jordan, while we
Ben,
wait,
why don't you give the verbal overview of the spec?
Yeah, well, actually, there's a great question in the chat that I think we go off of. So someone asked, it looks like Specs TN, or sorry, asked what's the pros and cons of a traditional POS and Solana Pay. It's a great question. I mean, I think that at its core, to me, what I get excited about blockchain-based commerce is there's going to be much more composability. So, for instance, someone running a store today, they have to make a choice of what POS system they're going to go with, whether it's Clover or Square or something like that. And they're really like that decision locks them into an ecosystem. Like they are now like anything they want to do, they need to make sure it works with whatever POS system they choose. The vision that we have for how this looks in a blockchain centered world is all these different things can fit together without permission. So like, I want to build some interesting new feature for like a coffee shop. Like I want to build like a reward system for a coffee shop that's going to increase their conversion, increase their retention, like all these great things. And I can walk into any coffee shop and be like, guess what? All you need to do is connect your wallet and you can just start using this. Like there is no integration with whatever POS you're doing because the merchant, just like all users on blockchain, own their data. And like because they own their data, they're free to do with it whatever they want. Is the kind of crux of how commerce on chain is going to be different.
Looks like we got the presentation or Jordan's screen up.
Yeah, I had to grant Chrome permission to share the screen here. Cool. So this is the basic spec. I think that as the protocol matures, as maybe we get somebody who's actually good at writing specs in a formal way, we might formalize this, but I hope we stay true to the spirit of keeping it simple and easy to understand and easy to implement. So as I mentioned, this draws from BIP21, which you can check out, but there's like a payment link that has a Solana scheme, a recipient, which is a public key address of a user or a merchant, and then there's a bunch of optional parameters. And we can kind of just like briefly walk through what those are and what the purpose of this is. So in a basic way, the problem that you have is that in a real world setting, you don't have a connection to a wallet. And you need to find a way to have a wallet, like your cryptocurrency wallet, be able to send tokens or SOL or something, interact in some way with a merchant. So this URL allows for a standard to encode a payment request. That's the way to think about this. So the merchant has their receiving address, which is just a native SOL address. It's not like an associated token address or anything like that. And they provide this in the payment link. You could share this among like friends. So like you could have this link or a QR code based on this link be something that you send to someone and they can send payment without like copying public keys around. which is like, weird and error prone. You can encode this in like an NFC. So there's an open issue on the GitHub right now where somebody's already done this in just the last couple of days. They bought some NFC tags and they were able to launch wallets using this. So I think that could be really interesting for like contactless payments for how to do that. So you specify like a recipient, you specify an amount. This is optional. So in the case of like tipping or, you're asking your friend for money or something like that, the amount can be specified by the user that's sending it if it's not provided in the request. You specify an SPL token field. So this is like the public key of the token mint. It's not the public key of a token account. It's the token mint. So for like USDC or whatever, this would be the address that you associate with the USDC mint on mainnet. And then we get into, I'll skip over reference real quick. It's important, we'll come back to it, and we'll talk about some of the display fields. So the label and message field, these aren't recorded on chain at all. These are just given to the wallet to show to the user to describe the transaction in some way. So like when the user scans a QR code or when they read this NFC, they have some context for the payment. And this is just like a UTF-8 field. It needs to be URL encoded, but like we keep this flexible in the spec. So you might be able to encode different data formats in this depending on what different wallets choose to support. So you could have like structured data inside this field in some way. And then there's a memo field. This is a text field that does get recorded on chain. It's not part of the state, but it is part of what validators record in transactions. And you can see this in like the Explorer or something like that. But it allows you to basically record some text message on chain along with the transaction that occurs. And then we'll talk about references. References are a way to specify public keys that are going to be added to the transaction. This talks a little bit about in the spec what the purpose of this is. So in Solana, you have to declare the account keys that you're going to reference in a transaction up front. And they don't necessarily need to correspond with accounts that exist on chain, but validators will index by these keys. So when you specify this, it allows you to look up the transaction by this reference ID that you know in advance. So in a normal flow, like when a user scans a QR code or NFC, and then they pay, as a merchant or operating a point of sale system, how do you find out about that transaction? Because you don't know who's sending it and you don't know the signature until after they sign it. These reference fields are a way to do that. So you basically create a unique pub key, you attach it to the request, the wallet includes it in the transaction, it doesn't do anything. And then it allows you to use this RPC method, get signatures for address, to be able to look that transaction up. And we'll talk about like how this actually works in the point of sale system. And that's it. That's all there is in the spec. There's like some examples for like how you might format this kind of thing. Beyond that, in documentation, kind of like details for how you'd integrate this as a merchant or a wallet, support the protocol in different ways. And those are pretty full descriptions that are given in there. But we can look at kind of like how the code for what you would do, different things.
I would be curious, Ben, maybe if we take a step back as putting your product hat on, thinking about fundamentally how, like, what this changes in a point of sale environment, and then thinking about like what is the infrastructure that needs to be built around it, and like maybe just let me just prompt you with like the whole point of this is that because we have a blockchain that can settle funds close to in seconds or less, we can have this protocol allow a user to send, let's say, USDC to the merchant instantly, and then the merchant now, with future iteration of this, can like have the consumer's public key and access to their wallet to engage in commerce. Like, how do you think this kind of changes the game from a commerce perspective, thinking about traditional payments versus what's happening now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think maybe just to start with like the devs and like what gets built. One of the hardest problems with doing really anything with payments in Web 2 is there's a lot of red tape. Like you need to be PCI compliant, you need to handle security. There's a lot of things that could go wrong. One of the beautiful aspects, there's a lot of those problems that go away. Now, there's definitely some worse problems. Like there's way Web3 to lose money in a way that's totally irrecoverable. That's actually pretty hard to do in Web 2. So there's definitely some rough edges. But on a whole, we really are seeing concerns a lot more, in my opinion. Like we're now like the merchant apps or commerce experiences, we can build them in a way where we know we can't accidentally take the user's money without their consent because the wallet is on the app now. And like that level of separation, I actually think frees up developers to be like, try things, ship experiments, move a lot faster. Like one of the hardest problems with like big consumer payments companies is like, you want to be experimental. Like that's the right way to build web software if you're going to be working with consumers. And you really can't be because you're dealing with their money and you're doing it in ways that like you really have control over all their money. So I think that's one way I think things are going to change. The other way I'd say is the interesting aspect coming from kind of the Web 2 world of doing payments for years is a lot of like the payments problems are really solved. Like we didn't need to build kind of like, well, let's call it like a Stripe or a Braintree for blockchains, because frankly, like if you just go read the Solana API, like that is a fairly robust way to make any kind of transaction you'd ever want. And like, so that those have been solved. But I think what that enables now is all of us as an industry of builders to say, like, let's start to think about the next level of abstraction. That we would talk a lot about at Venmo was like merchants their payment processing needs have been solved. They don't need anything new there. What they need is customer acquisition. So I think like I'd challenge everyone here to think about like what are the needs that businesses have that are beyond the just basics, beyond just like getting paid. And I think that looks different for every business. I mean, like I think about ticketing for a second, which is something that I'm sure all of us have thought a lot about with NFTs. But like you can, by using NFTs as the method of exchange for tickets, you take this huge problem for the ticketing industry, which is the secondary market, and actually just turn it into an advantage. Where like now this is something that like you should just embrace because there's no it doesn't hurt you at all, and it's actually probably better for the user. So I think those are the things that we're gonna, I think, start seeing smart teams explore over the next couple of years. Is like, how do you basically use these new primitives to do things that were just impossible in Web 2? Shiraz, Josh, Jordan, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that we're excited about is thinking about commerce. What does commerce and loyalty look like? So, for example, like the ability for a merchant to provide some discount or benefit to users based on a token they have in their wallet, right? That could be a simple way. Like that's kind of reinventing loyalty, which it's just so much more frictionless and easy, right? I'm a merchant. I could mint some NFT that represents like some affinity or loyalty to my brand. And now using this protocol, what are the kinds of experiences I can enable for customers that walk in that maybe I don't know, but I know that they have that token in their wallet, and because of that, I can enable certain experiences. Like that's what the cool stuff that can be built. Like we can, you know, from a developer or an entrepreneur perspective, it's like if you could rebuild loyalty programs from scratch, but you now have the infrastructure of the blockchain. And one of the best things about building in this space is that, I think you had said this, Ben, the hardest part about building a payments or commerce startup is like just the core payments infrastructure, and that's all built. We have the blockchain. The most native transaction on the blockchain is moving, transferring digital assets. That's all solved. So you can now be like, that infrastructure is there for me. Now I can build the layers on top that I can monetize, or build new infrastructure on top of, or layers on top of that can be. So you can build platforms on top of this. You can build end consumer products. You can build end merchant products. I mean, even for merchants, like we did this very simple POS app, but the reality for the commercial opportunity for devs is to build like custodial services, dashboards and reporting, reconciliation, all of that sort of stuff. We have someone reach out that wants to do both acceptance of USDC and doing payroll in that, right? So that's there's all the stuff that can be built on top of the protocol. I think is for a developer is what's really cool and interesting.
Yeah, payroll. Oh, go ahead, Josh.
No, I was just going to add to that. I mean, generally speaking, I feel like I'm excited about putting these amazing capabilities into the hands of small businesses. And these were out of reach for small businesses for a long time, right? Like these are the types of things we're talking about, these loyalty programs or these other types of, consumer merchant relationships were really the provenance of Targets and Walmarts and like the big players of the world that now we can really enable for almost anyone through the blockchain and the infrastructure that we built. I'm super excited about that.
I think payroll is a really interesting area. Like that's like you want to talk about an industry that's it's pretty like solidified and hasn't changed much. It's payroll. Like it's some of the oldest payment tech that's out there. But like now we can do things, and there's already teams exploring this, so like streaming payments. Like think how great it is, especially if you're someone who's not making much money to get your money instantly every day or even every second. Like that is at a legitimate value that you cannot do today. That I think is going to be better for workers and better for us as a culture.
About the one of the biggest problems, which if you look at it, every problem is really an opportunity, right? Every area of friction is an opportunity for someone to build a new product. So to me, the biggest problem, and I feel like this is not controversial at all, is onboarding people, onboarding consumers, but also now onboarding merchants. So, oh great, like merchants have heard about this cool Solana Pay thing. Oh, I can settle instantly and I don't have to pay 3%. Awesome. How do I get started? And right now we need developers, founders, entrepreneurs to think about how do I build tooling and onboarding features and infrastructure to make it really simple for both merchants and consumers. But we can even think about merchants, right? I feel like people are trying to solve the consumer problem, but now we're saying like there's an entire market of small businesses that would love to leverage a system like this, but we're at the protocol level, right? So we're just defining specifications and standards. And then suddenly we've got customers that want to use this. There's a huge gap there for people to come in, step in, and build the tooling. Because the protocol is not the end answer. It's just the most foundational thing. So be interesting, Jordan and Ben, to get your thoughts on like what are some of the hard problems on onboarding, either on the merchant or consumer side, that you think would be exciting for developers to tackle?
And one thing on onboarding, just to call out, I mean, like if I was in the audience or thinking about building something on Solana Pay, like one of the things I think about is like, hey, there's lots of like really like good companies that are in Web 2 that are providing like payment services. Like some of the hottest startups are still in that. Like they're going to do this, so like why should I? I think the thing I would challenge everyone to think about is like you can think about what businesses look like very differently in blockchains. Like we can build much smaller, much more efficient businesses or potentially even DAOs that can exist and get composed together to build these things. So like don't just assume that like the Braintrees and Stripes of the world are going to come in and solve the problems for everyone. Like there is, I think, a lot of room for us to rethink a lot of these concepts in a crypto native way. So in terms of like what actually is needed, like to me, it's really basic stuff. It's like, hey, I'm a merchant. I know nothing about blockchains. Like I just want to get started, and I don't want to shoot myself in the foot. This is especially important if we're talking about who frankly are probably not going to be tech savvy. So like how can we do that? How can we get them to like manage their keys and do all these things without being effectively another centralized entity? Like these are hard problems, but I think there's a lot of people that are exploring solutions. It's like social recovery, whether it's like using like sharding private keys across multiple sources so no one entity controls it. Like I believe there, like I'm a firm believer that self-custody is a core tenet to this whole thing working. And I think if enough of us really put our minds, so that's the merchant side. The consumer side is also very similar concerns. Like they need to be able to manage their keys in a way that is transparent to them and that they can't screw up. But there's also some more things. I mean, like the reality is all this here, we're degens, we're keeping all our money, hopefully like our total net worth at crypto, never touching fiat ever again. But the reality is like most, they need on-ramps, they need off-ramps, and they need those on-ramps and off-ramps to work really, really well. They need things like the ability for to be able to instantly move fiat from a stable point in minutes or seconds. Like, I'd also I think like compliance and regulation is something none of us like to think about, but the reality is it's here. And like if we're moving money and we want to try to do it in a way that the general public is going to do, we're gonna need to grapple with some of those things. But I also think there's some opportunities to push the envelope on how we're letting regulation impact UX. Like some of the best consumer payments products all have like some of the most creative like legal and compliance teams out there, because they're looking at the laws and trying to figure out how can we do the right thing here but not get in the user's way. And so like some of the things I would love to see is like it absolutely is ways to do fiat on onboarding that has limits that require very, very little from the user in terms of KYC. Like those solutions exist out there. Like I'd love to see us push the envelope there. I also think that like the decentralized identity solutions are getting a lot better. And like I recognize how sensitive a topic that is about like associating like PII or personal identifiable information with your key. Like in a lot of ways, it's very against the ethos of crypto. I see this as like we need to give people options. I can say like, hey, it doesn't matter who is how I'm managing my keys. If I have this token, which represents that I have been KYC'd, I'm good. That gives me the option where it's like, I can have other wallets that might not have that token. Like I could still have wallets that are fully kind of like unknown. Like that's my right as a person. But if I need to work with a real business that has compliance obligations, I can always use my like kind of wallet with my decentralized identity token. So like that's another area where I think we're going to need to spend time as an industry and ecosystem. I'd encourage everyone to check out Civic. I think they're doing a lot in this space. I think there's some folks from Civic here in Seattle today. So go find them, go find me, and let's talk about it.
Yeah, I think one of the common things we see in line with that is how merchants think about consumer protection. So like, I think that everybody's seen like escrow tutorials on Solana, but escrow or like some means of allowing things like disputes, chargebacks, these things can be decentralized. You could have a DAO who's responsible for this. So it's not like 2 or 3 entities controlling the chargeback process. This could be something that consumers still have choice in and merchants have choice in based on the track record of those companies, not just based on fiat. So I think that like there's a lot of opportunity in how we think about how regular users, and as we grow this space to a large number of these users, how are they going to interface with this, and how do we like flatten the learning curve a little bit for this? I think that's like the same with fiat on-ramps. If there's a way that, you know, is sufficiently compliant to allow users to on-ramp with small amounts, I think that lets them like get their feet wet. Well, it's like lets them start to get familiar with crypto, at least in a way that I think a lot of us are familiar with. Like probably the first time that you went on a DEX or something like that and started making trades on there, it's very foreign. There's like, you know, crazy shit happening all over the screen. And like, it's a very immersive experience. And I think we all understand crypto and like the communication around crypto to be very immersive, but that immersiveness is also a wall for new users. And I think that we need to find ways to make those things easier to onboard with. And then they can really start to see, hey, this is actually really fun, and get like a sense of joy and exploration through it. And you can't have that when you're just like overwhelmed with complexity.
So there's yeah, I just want to like, this is a great topic. I think there's been a little bit of chat in the chat box about this. So the biggest challenge to onboarding, what would you guys say is the biggest challenge to onboarding, either on the merchant side or the consumer side?
Well, I think it's, go ahead.
I was going to say for the consumer, it's KYC. It's like how, like what is the right way to collect KYC? I think for the merchant side, it is probably custody. Like how are they going to manage their keys in a way that's secure? That would be my guess.
I was gonna kind of take it up a little bit higher level and just UX, right? It's just like if you take a normie and you like try and get them to onboard a wallet and like seed phrases and this and that, it's designed. Every experience has been designed for crypto natives, which is fine. That's by design, right? We're people in the ecosystem, but if we want to start reaching people outside of the ecosystem, I think UX, usability and design needs to be kind of more front and center. And then from there, everything, you know, there's second order problems like KYC. I think that's probably, for me, the biggest problem to solve in onboarding, which maybe is less of an engineering thing and more of a design thing, but. Did you have, Jordan, were you going to chime in there with something?
No, I agree with those things.
Okay.
I think that it's, you know, it's normal for us as engineers to think about how to solve technical problems. And I think as the technical problems in blockchain have gotten to a higher level of abstraction, like we have a lot of the primitives that we need to build higher level applications. We need to start thinking in a higher level way about how those applications can be used by people that aren't already sold on this vision.
I think one thing you had mentioned, Jordan, that prompted a thought was you mentioned, for example, chargebacks. A lot of, one of the common questions we get are people asking about some of the features that have been present in traditional payment networks and sort of an expectation that these would port over into a blockchain payment system. And we argue that they don't necessarily all need to port over. So for example, the notion of a dispute or a chargeback for going, you know, to a local convenience store and buying coffee or, you know, milk, you really probably don't need chargeback protections, right? It's so why should the system support or underwrite that? However, the example I like to give is the cruise liner one, where if you buy, you know, a ticket to Carnival Cruise and it's 8 months in the future and it's $4,000 and they go under, you know, in 3 months, then you know you want to be able to dispute that charge. So that's an opportunity to be like, okay, for certain types of transactions, maybe a merchant would want to offer, you know, some sort of protection. So what does that look like on chain? Is it an escrow program? Is it a smart contract that manages funds in escrow? And then can these disputes be resolved through, you know, programmatically or, you know, on chain, or is there off chain data? So is there a role for someone to build oracles for dispute management? So the cruise line example could be a simple one. It's either a binary event. Did that cruise line take off on this day or not? If it did, then submit that on chain, and then the program knows, okay, I can release these funds because I know that some oracle told me that this cruise liner took off, and I can now release the $2,000 out of the $4,000 that were held in escrow. I mean, in traditional payments, it's the acquiring bank that holds back those funds, and for some of these higher risk ones. So, in some ways, I think it's very interesting to think about, like, can we build some of these features on chain? But they don't necessarily, it's not like a blunt object that every transaction needs chargeback protection. That's the beauty of a composable system, where it's like for, you know, the coffee shop that in Redwood City, it probably don't need chargeback. How often are you gonna, you know, dispute your latte?
In the chat about what we're doing or what is happening on the BD sales and marketing side to onboard merchants to use Solana Pay. And I will say it's still very early. We've only been live for a week, and we have a tremendous amount of inbound interest. Hundreds and hundreds of small businesses have reached out to us thus far, and we're putting that strategy together right now on how to get them.
Here's the simple answer. Somebody go build a company to service. It could be a services company. Right now, you're looking at the BD team for Solana Pay, and like we're NGMI. If me and Josh are responsible for scaling up our merchant network, so if someone wants to build a merchant acquisition services company, services companies maybe are not as sexy, but like there's money to be made. Like, go help small businesses get set up, or build a platform to make it easy. Build self-servicing tools. Like, that all stuff we would welcome people to build, right? I mean, unless
Max Variant says, "Give me a month and I'll have something." So yeah,
please.
That sounds good.
Honestly, I think like this is, you know, we're, you know, it's in a way we're like just presenting gifts to founders and developers to be like, I mean, there's like probably 10 different ideas that have come off the launch of Solana Pay, and like one of the things that's interesting from where we sit is like we're not in the position to build end products and services and platforms. We're building at the protocol layer. We're providing the building blocks for devs to build like new kind of features or companies or platforms. So that's what I would say.
Let's do a quick. What's the best way to reach us for these various questions or collaboration points? I mean, I know there's a lot of different channels. So, for example, Jordan, if somebody wants to reach you, where's a great place to have a chat with you on this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I would say so. There's a Solana Pay channel in the Discord if you have the developer role in Discord, which you can add for your account. I would say join there if it's like developer focused. If it's more business development or like onboarding focused, I would say Josh, Shiraz, or Ben.
Hanging out, where are you spending time? Where can you chat with people?
I'm definitely in that channel with Jordan. So if you do have questions, feel free to bring them there. But more generally, I think I'm getting a lot of people talking to me on Twitter. So my DMs are open. I'm Ben E. Mills on Twitter. Just DM me. And I'd say, especially for the folks house in Seattle, I'm hopefully going to be down there in an hour or two. I'd love to talk to people, especially people who are interested in talking about things like how do DAOs fit into commerce? How do we make this ecosystem composable? All those things. I'd love to talk to anyone who's interested today.
Yeah, I'm at Josh Fried, JOSHFRIED on Twitter. Also, yeah, send me a message there. We have an intake form at solanapay.com where you can let us know what it is you're building, for who, what you're thinking about, or maybe you're just a merchant that's interested. Again, like I said, we've had hundreds reach out already. Fill that out and we'll get back to you soon. Shiraz, what's the best way to find you?
Call Josh.
I'm not giving out my phone number on this Twitch stream, so you're gonna have to try again.
I'm old. You can send me a fax, or I have a telephone, like the rotary telephone.
Nice.
Yeah. I forget my Twitter handle. I think it's Shiraz Share.
Yeah, something like that.
Sorry. Wait. I wanted to. Sorry, Josh, did you have a question?
No, go ahead. Take it.
Oh. Ben, I don't know if you wanted to kind of go like pie in the sky and talk about like what could be exciting for everyone in this space as we think about like the next 5 years. And like you mentioned that, like, what does decentralized commerce look like? Like, how do we build how does Linux, an analogy, become like the payment system, right? Like, where it's not run by a few entrenched, multi-billion-dollar companies, but it's a community building the commerce rails.
So I'd love to use Linux as an example because I actually think the process on here stems from the Unix philosophy of do one thing well. Like the Unix system is so composable because they really had a focus on like, I'm not going to make these big bloated programs. I'm going to make them do one thing really well and make it really. This, unfortunately, like web, I'd encourage everyone here to read a lot of the writing by Chris Dixon if you haven't. Like Web 2 like flips companies into this value extraction mode, which basically means they're just going to start expanding. Like you can see that with all the major tech companies. It's like everyone's doing everything. Like I think if you were to talk to us, any one of us in like 2008, and you're like, do you think PayPal or Facebook is going to be like a media company and a payments company? No, like of course not. But like that is what they are now. It's because that is the best path they have to succeeding in Web 2. What I want to see is a lot more fragmentation, which similar to the example we talked about, transaction insurance or protection. It's like let the user and the merchant choose, decide what they need in that moment. Don't force things on them. There is no one size fits all. Like because the other thing to keep in mind, payments is notoriously hard to do cross-border. Like blockchains are global. Like Solana Pay is a global payments network. Like Solana is a global P2P network. Like these things like don't exist easily right now in Web 2. And we have them basically out the gate in Web 3. And I think that really just changed little bit more concrete, I mean, I believe like we should see things like, fraud services, potentially even things like fulfillment and shipping services, maybe even customer support. Like these are things that can start to exist as standalone entities. Maybe they're companies, maybe they're DAOs. I mean, I think that's for all of us to explore and figure out together, and probably make a bunch of mistakes. But I think if we do this right, we will become much, much more. Like I can tell you, like one of the things that it really frustrates me about Web2 payments is, so I was a very early engineer at Braintree. And like Braintree, just like Stripe, like we make the claim that like we're solving payments for merchants. Like we payments team, like we handle this. Like when I would go visit merchants, like we visit Uber or Airbnb, and I realized I'm like, holy shit, Uber has more engineers than Braintree overall. How does this make sense? Like what is like, wait a second, like our whole value prop is like we're solving payments for you, but you still have to hire 100+ person payments team. Like that doesn't add up. Like I think that is the reality right now. Payments is a really, really, there's a lot of domain specific things to figure out. There's fraud, there's reconciliation, like the list goes on. And like what I think if you have the opportunity down every company and really ask like, what have you built for payments? You actually see we're just duplicating the same stuff over and over again. And like we're all doing it slightly differently, and the reality is just inefficient. And so like my vision for what commerce looks like on chain is we just stop doing that. We start solving problems once the right way, and all benefit as we improve that and contribute to that. Like the reality is like fraud, like let's talk about fraud for a second. Cash App, most consumer payment companies are losing an incredible amount of money to fraud today. Like imagine if we all just could share a credit card that's bad. Like I spent time like a few kind of like collaborators that were at Square and some others while I was at Venmo, and like a lot of us wanted to do it, but there was just too much, like back and forth, and like the teams not being comfortable sharing data, and it's just like this sucks, because the reality is this would be better for all of us if we did it, but we couldn't. Like it was just, those are the things that will be possible as commerce is on chain. So yeah, that's a little hint. I mean, I think there's a lot of other things that we probably don't have enough time to talk about. Like how do companies change? Like how does payroll change? Like how does global commerce change? Like there's a team that I know right now is working on how can we focus on like countries that are traditionally like don't have the infrastructure to run. Like there are people there that actually can provide services. Like they're like designers, they're engineers, they're people out there that live in these countries that don't really have an easy way to basically like be a contractor to a US based entity. With Solana, like they're going to be able to do that now, and teams are building software for them to get that done. Like that's awesome. Like that is going to change the supply chain and how we think about labor overall.
All right, so we are close to wrap. Just got to throw a couple of plugs out there. So if you haven't registered at our Riptide Hackathon yet, it's solana.com/Riptide. Obviously, please register, find a team, or build solo if you'd like, but there's plenty of people still looking for collaborators. A lot of these ideas that we talked about or hinted at, and some that we didn't, are actually listed on the ideas tab at the Riptide website. So it's solana.com/Riptide/ideas. And for the first time, we really laid out some visuals, some front ends. We put together some Loom videos explaining some of these ideas. So if you haven't really taken a chance to dive in there, please do. We spent a lot of time front loading that with these ideas because we want to see some of these things get built. And again, if you want to do something that's not listed there, that's great too. There was a bunch of ideas that came out of this chat today that I think we just didn't have time to put into visuals, but I think would make incredibly cool companies that would make the future of commerce and payments a reality. So just to wrap up, any last thoughts? Anybody want to jump in?
One, maybe wanted Jordan to comment. Let me ask you this question. Like, if I'm a developer, let's say I'm a front-end developer, or I write server-side code, but I'm like, I don't really know Rust, or I don't really want to learn blockchain. Like, to me, it seems like there's still lots of opportunity for developers that aren't kind of the lowest level of the stack. I'm just curious to get your comment, like what you would say to a developer that's like, for example, just knows like React or Java.
Yeah, so I guess I would first say to check out the really excellent Solana Cookbook that provides a lot of examples for both how to do stuff with Solana programs, and then also how to build clients for Solana programs. It's possible to do a ton of stuff on Solana without writing a program. We started working on Solana Pay. I think whatever the code in GitHub goes back to like October. It was public even then. And so one of the things that we considered prior to that was writing a program, and we decided that we didn't need to for what we needed to build. So like, if you think about it in that way, like Solana Pay is built without Rust. It's just JavaScript. It's JavaScript and React. And like, you can build things on top of Solana Pay that are just JavaScript or React or whatever kind of like Web 2 stack you're familiar with, whether that's e-commerce or something else. You don't need to jump in and write programs. You don't need a Solana program-centric model even for your business. If you understand how that stuff works, if you understand the runtime, if you can do those things, that's great because it'll expand how you can think about the problem. But like, it's not a prerequisite to do. And I think that if anybody can take something away from like how the Solana Pay system works, it'll just be that you can go to the POS app itself. It's just like a React app that runs in the browser. So like all the demos that you've seen in like coffee shops or whatever, you don't even need to know how to build a native app. It's just like a small React app that's there. And you can take it and you can modify it to do all kinds of things. So like that demo where somebody was like dynamically minting NFTs and sending them to somebody's wallet. That's like a modified version of the POS app. And you can think of a lot of different ways to do that that don't require that you write a program.
What's cool, because again, using the POS app as an example, like imagine being tasking someone with building a point of sale system, and you would imagine like, oh man, I have to like build an entire like payment stack. And it's like, no, you actually just need to build a very simple front end. And then from there, it's like all of the bells and whistles that you want to make it, productized for your segment if it's a small business. So like, how do I onboard them? How do I make play? And that all seems like much more accessible development for people that maybe have kind of more traditional development backgrounds.
Yep. I think I'm getting told we're out of time. So once again, solana.com/Riptide. Sign up there, register now. It's going to through the middle of March, I believe. And if you need ideas, contact one of us or check out the ideas tab, solana.com/Riptide/ideas. I want to thank Shiraz, Ben, Jordan, and everybody on the payments team here at Solana Labs for getting this out the door. We're really excited to see what you guys build. Let's do this. Let's do this together.
LFG.
LFG. Thanks, guys.